Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. We have an absolutely wonderful guest for you today. Her name is Zetta Elliott. She is here to celebrate the Witches Apprentice. It's the latest in her Dragons in a Bag series. Before we invite Zetta into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids. You can connect with us on Instagram @readingwithyourkids. And if you are a Twitter user, connect with us @JedleyMagic. And we would absolutely love it if you could go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can sign up for our free newsletter. You can also use the contact button at the top of the page to send us a message. We love hearing from you. Joining us right now from the Chicago area in the state of Illinois. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new middle grade novel. It's called The Witches Apprentice. It's part of her Dragons in a Bag series. Please welcome to the show, Zetta Elliott. Hey, Zetta, how are you?
Good morning, Jed. Thanks for that warm welcome. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm great. We're really excited to have you on. I can't wait for you to tell us about The Witches Apprentice.
Well, I'm pretty excited, and I'm very glad that there is a book 3, because for a while there, it looked like there might only be 2 books in the series. But The Witches Apprentice extends Jackson's original adventure. He has been apprenticed to a witch named Ma, and he is ready. He feels like he's been tested. He's proven himself. He did lose one baby dragon, but he got it back. And the baby dragon was returned to the realm of magic. And now Jax thinks, I'm ready to cast spells. I'm ready to become a witch. And all of a sudden, Ma puts his training on hold, and he can't understand why. So Jax starts holding some secrets of his own. His friend Vikram gives him a phoenix egg, and it hatches. And so Jax is in Chicago with Ma for the Witches Convention. He is not allowed to attend the convention, but he is otherwise occupied with this baby phoenix. And then when he forces his way into the convention, he ends up, well, maybe I shouldn't give that away. He ends up having a brand new job that he did not expect to have. So Jax may not be a witch, but he does have a very important position at the end of the novel.
This sounds like so much fun. I'm wondering, how much fun was it for you to set this fantasy, this really fun fantasy story in your hometown of Chicago?
Well, I have to say, I'm an immigrant. I don't know if you've heard my accent. I'm from Canada, and I have only just recently moved to Chicago. So I was in New York for 20 years, and I always write about the place where I live. So the first 2 books in the series are set in Brooklyn. And I get lots of emails and letters from kids in Brooklyn who enjoy going to the different sites in the novel, which of course really do exist in Brooklyn. But then I left New York in 2018. I moved to Philadelphia. I wrote some books there. I moved to Central Pennsylvania. I wrote some books there. And I knew I wanted book 3 in the series to be set in Chicago. New York is an amazing city. I love Brooklyn. It's my heart. But I do think that New York takes up a lot of space in the imagination. And it's good to kind of have different locations introduced in our stories. So I knew I wanted it to be set in Chicago, and I figured, okay, I'm going to do some research, visit Chicago, and then, of course, the pandemic happened. And so we weren't traveling and doing research. But I was also looking to buy a home. And I left New York because I knew I could never afford to do that in the city. I considered Philadelphia, Central Pennsylvania, and decided on Chicago. And I really wanted to live in Hyde Park. 20 years ago, I came to Chicago for the first time and fell in love with Hyde Park. So I started doing research online. You know, you couldn't actually tour homes, but you could do these video tours. So I started doing sort of video tours of places in Chicago and looking at the map. And when I looked at the Google map for Hyde Park, I saw that there was the Garden of the Phoenix just a few blocks away from where I live. So I knew that was going to be featured in the novel. And then I just sort of looked at the map and picked at different places and thought that would be really fascinating. I think world building in a lot of people's minds means creating something out of thin air, like you're entirely manufacturing something from your imagination. But fantasy for me is really based in reality. And I very much prefer to have a recognizable urban environment that I can then insert a little bit of magic into. So that was the goal for setting the novel in Chicago. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. You know, you just said something that resonated with me a whole lot. I know my taste in books, and obviously we're talking about books that kids and our middle graders and our teens and tweens are going to enjoy. And it's been a long time since I've been that age. But I noticed my taste in books has changed a lot. I used to especially love horror stories and ghost stories. And then I became a dad, and I remember being in the middle of an Anne Rice novel. And my son was born, I think, when I was on page 150, and I went back to read it, and I said, nope, don't even want to think about this kind of world while my son is alive. But we've had lots of authors on you've created these amazing fantasy universes, and it's fun, but it's hard for me to kind of wrap my head around. And you were just talking about, sprinkling a little bit of magic into places that are real. And that's something that I can put my hands around. It's everybody has different taste. And saying that just made me realize probably one of the reasons why I don't gravitate to a lot of really kind of out there books, because it's just hard for me to imagine.
It is. And, I went through a phase where I was not reading fantasy at all. And I sort of looked down my nose at high fantasy, and I thought, these make-believe worlds and these people with, 5 ears. And, it just seemed like not ridiculous, but just so far removed from reality. And, as a Black feminist writer, I sort of feel like we have an obligation to more deeply engage with our current reality. I'm not writing to give people a way out. I'm writing in order to get people to see the world that we're in a different way. And, magic is about power. So when you're writing fantasy fiction for children, you're really teaching them about power. And what does it mean to give a child a whole bunch of power when they don't know how to use it or what to do with it? And for me, I grew up being very close to my grandparents. Elders were really important to me. So that's a theme in the book also, is that Jax really needs older people around to sort of help him understand why he wants power in the first place, and what he can do once he has it, and how to use it responsibly. And what do you do when someone else has power and they're being irresponsible with it? So Jax is really imagining the kind of world he wants to live in. He wants magical creatures to be integrated into the human world. But most of the adults in his life don't want that. Mm-hmm. They think that in order to keep magical creatures safe, they need to be somewhere far, far away from humans. And you know what? That makes a lot of sense. We haven't done such a good job taking care of the animals in our world. Many are endangered, if not extinct. But Jax really thinks that things can be different. And I feel like in this moment, of the pandemic, this is our moment, right, for Build Back Better, to think about some of the mistakes that we've made, some of the imbalances and injustices in our society, and how we could dream a better world. That's one of the strongest appeals of the United States to me as an immigrant, is that it's a nation of dreamers. And so I really wanted Jax to be able to articulate and debate the future that he would like to see, because kids, they don't get to vote. They don't really get a say. They just inherit the world that we adults create, and we haven't done such a great job.
You said something that struck a chord with me, that Jax needed the elders in his life to help him learn and to help guide him. And I think as you were saying that the opposite has to be true as well. The elders need somebody like Jax to continue things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Jax has a couple of adult allies who agree with his point of view, and they feel like he has fresh eyes, right? And he has this fresh perspective. And when I was considering book 3, a few people asked me if I was going to write the pandemic into the novel. And I felt like that might be too triggering and too difficult for a number of children who have lost someone to the pandemic. But I did decide to add a sleeping spell. And so there's a sleeping spell that has been cast over Brooklyn and then also over Chicago, and it only affects adults. So it's picking off adults. They're falling asleep in the street. And that means that, kids have to sort of find their way on their own. And initially, some of Jackson and his friends, they think, well, this is great. This is our opportunity. And then ultimately, they start to think, can we really move forward without our elders, without their wisdom and their experience? So I am really thinking about community and interdependence and the fact that everyone in our community has a way to contribute and a role to play. Book 3 is much longer than the first 2 books, and it has an expanded cast. It's sort of, I think, the pivotal book for me to sort of explain my use of magic and the history of magic and where we're going. I have a contract for book 4, The Enchanted Bridge, that will come out in 2023. No contract for book 5, The War of the Witches, but fingers crossed that Random House will commit to that. And I'm looking forward to sort of wrapping up the series with that final book.
You mentioned early on that you weren't sure there was going to be a book 3. Was it that pandemic related, or because you were trying to find a place to live?
It was a strange situation that Random House published books 1 and 2. They acquired them in a 2-book deal, and the books were selling really well, and they just decided not to continue. Yeah, it was pretty frustrating. I have had to self-publish most of my children's books, and so I assumed I would need to self-publish the rest of the books in the series. But then, last summer, things were pretty tumultuous in our country around the murder of George Floyd, and a lot of corporations made statements about their support for Black lives and wanting to do right by Black creatives. And suddenly there was a new conversation about keeping the series going. So I don't entirely know their justification for it, why it was dropped, why it was picked up. But I'm glad they made the decision they did. I just asked for the sales figures, and I think for books 1 and 2, we're at about 250,000 copies sold.
Wow.
So it's a series worth investing in. It's a series worth continuing. It was chosen for the Global Read Aloud. I was really grateful for that this past fall. I met with kids in Alaska and kids in Nairobi, Kenya. Kids all around the world were reading the book. So yeah, I hope that fantasy fiction that is inclusive and that centers kids that have been marginalized for so long, I hope that this is not just a fad or a trend. I hope it's something that's going to continue, this commitment to having equity in children's publishing.
Well, I certainly hope so too. You mentioned early on that magic is power, and magic does have lots of power. And it's as someone who's made living as a magician, I understand the history that early on the magicians were the people with secret knowledge who would use that secret knowledge to obtain power over others. But one of the things I've learned in my life is that the real magic in our lives is when we come together, in respectful ways and inclusive ways, that's when the real magic happens in our lives. And so I agree. I hope that this is the start of a new wave in children's literature.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You're a magician. Wow.
I am.
That's amazing.
Yes, every morning I'm able to turn myself into a beautiful prince. I haven't done it yet, so that's why you're seeing this mess on your Zoom screen. But you mentioned early on when you moved to Chicago, one of the things you did was you took out a map and you looked around and you saw the Phoenix Gardens and you just kind of popped. That's a really fun exercise, and I know that there's a lot of kids out there who don't know what a map is, or they think they've only seen a map in a fantasy book about life back when the dinosaurs were there. But maps actually do exist, and I want to suggest to families that might be a great activity. Just pull out a map and close your eyes and have your kids put your finger. My wife and I did that for a vacation. I said, "Where do you want to go?" And she said, "I don't know." And she opened up, she spun the globe and she popped her finger down and it landed on the nation of Panama. And we had the most wonderful time in Panama. We met beautiful people, explored the rainforest, went into didn't go in the canal, but journeyed on the canal. And it was just magnificent. And, and before we left, when we're getting ready and people were saying, "Where are you going?" And we said, "Well, we're going to Panama." And the response was, "Why?" And I was like, "Well, we just spun the globe. There we were, and we went." And so I think that would be it certainly is a fun exercise for authors to do, to kind of just pop your finger, where am I going to go? What am I going to find there? I think that would be a lot of fun for families to do, too.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I was thrilled when I lived in Brooklyn. I had a friend who was a librarian at PS 32, Adam Marcus, and he used to read children's literature set in Brooklyn or in New York City, and then he would make walking tours so that kids who had read the book, families could join him, and he would take them to the sites that were in the book. And I think he did that for 2 of my novels, Ship of Souls and Dragons in a Bag. And I'm really hoping that families will do the same thing with The Witches Apprentice. Either, if you're on a tour coming to Chicago, here are some places you can check out. I mean, I absolutely knew that the Silver Bean at Millennium Park was going to be featured in the novel. It's actually named Cloud Gate. So I thought, okay, it's a gate, it's a portal. Yeah, we're definitely working that into the novel. But it's so much fun to learn about the history of a community, of a city, of your own neighborhood. I used to take my students on a tour of their neighborhood, Bed-Stuy, in Brooklyn, and I would just say, look for the cornerstones, right? Look for the cornerstone of the churches and the apartment buildings, and there will be a number engraved on that cornerstone. Let's figure out how old these buildings were. Let's try to imagine what this place looked like 150 years ago. I think because I am an immigrant, I do come to things with a different perspective, and everything is sort of new and exciting for me. And it's a great way to get to know your neighborhood. One of the most important things I am trying to do with my fantasy fiction is to make sure that kids know that magic is for everyone. Mm-hmm. And magic can happen to anyone, anywhere. All the fiction I read as a child was set in England. I absolutely believed that you had to be a white child living in a mansion in England or a castle in order to have a magical adventure. So, when I first started writing, I wrote about white kids. I didn't know that I had permission, I had the right to write about someone like myself living in my own suburban neighborhood, which seemed pretty boring. I always tell kids I left Toronto because I didn't believe anything magical would happen to me there. Mm-hmm. But I absolutely believed something magical would happen to me in Brooklyn. And then it did. So if you believe magic will find you, it will. Yeah. And I think it's important for kids to recognize that their own community contains important people and important places and histories. Sites of magic for sure. Yeah.
Well, I would love to invite you to this Hyde Park here in Boston. Our neighborhood, the little neighborhood of Reedville that we just love and adore. Literally 2 blocks down the street from my house is a playground. It's called Meg's Playground. It was formerly called Camp Meg's. It was a military training ground, and it was the home of the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, the first black regiment that fought in the Civil War.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Yeah. Imagine the story we could write there. So you're playing in the playground and suddenly the swing next to you is empty, but it's swinging and somebody is whistling and you think, who's on the swing set? Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, we could do time travel. We could do ghost stories. So much potential.
I just got chills. I just walked by that swing set an hour ago. Wow.
Well, I love history, and a lot of kids, I think, maybe think history is boring, but when you make it a ghost story, that's the perfect way to bring the past into the present.
Well, I love that. Right now, my wonderful niece is struggling in history, and one of the reasons is that we present so much history is presented as boring, like cue cards with facts on it. Here,
Exactly.
just
Dull
memorize
facts.
this stuff, and it doesn't mean anything. But when you turn that history into a story, when I mentioned, the 54th Regiment, your eyes lit up because you had heard that. You didn't read a fact sheet about it. You heard a story about these brave men and the struggles that they went through fighting not only the enemy, but also the enemy within, the
Racism
prejudice within.
Ranks. Yeah. Well, anyone who's seen the film Glory, boy, you better have a box of Kleenex next to you. Yeah.
Well, you talked about, that book 4 will be with us at some point in the future, and book 5 will be somewhere, if not with, your current situation. There'll be another home for it. What other kind of writing do you like to do for kids?
Oh, wow. I just finished my first graphic novel.
Ooh.
And I had resisted that for so long. I have a friend who has a graphic novel imprint called Megascope, and he kept poking me for years. He's a comics scholar, and he kept poking me saying, you should do a graphic novel. You should do a graphic novel. And he has done 2 award-winning adaptations of Octavia Butler's novels. Now, Octavia Butler is one of the most important Black science fiction and fantasy writers ever. She passed away quite a while ago, but her 2 books, Kindred, which is a time travel novel, and Parable of the Sower, which is a dystopian novel, I used to teach those to my college students. And they were books that I wish I had read when I was in high school. But now that they are graphic novels, on the one hand, I think a whole bunch of kids who might never have picked up a 300-page novel are going to read it. But now they are no longer going to pick up a 300-page novel, right? I think kids are so much more attuned to visual media. And so when John was saying, you should adapt some of your stories into graphic novels, I couldn't do it because I felt like then kids are never going to read the text-only novel. And I think that does something for your imagination, that it works your imagination in a different way. But I said to him, if I ever just write something original that's intended to be graphic, I will let you know. And as soon as I moved to Chicago on September 27th, and on October 2nd, I started a new story called The Boy in the Lake. And it's about a teenage girl who is having difficulty at home. She's being abused, and she spends a lot of time at the lake after school, and she meets Emmett Till in the water. He lives there in the lake. And so it's not a story for kids. It's definitely for teenagers, older readers. But just the way in which your environment can inspire narrative. And so drawing on the history, Emmett Till, who was lynched in 1955, 14-year-old boy, went from Chicago to Mississippi to spend the summer. His home, which is now a museum, is not that far away from where I live. So I can walk to where Emmett Till lived and grew up. And then I can walk to the lake. The lake is part of this water system that used to assist freedom seekers when they were trying to escape slavery and get to Canada. Like, there's so much rich history here in this region that I would like to make more appealing and interesting to young people. So I just wrote that graphic novel, finished it last week. In November, I wrote a poem a day. I still write poetry. My first poetry collection, Say Her Name, I adapted for the stage. So we're trying to get that up on stage. Dragons in a Bag is currently being shopped around. We had one film option situation that fell through. So we're hoping the second time around, we're going to be able to get it turned into a film or a TV series or something like that. So that's basically what I'm working on right now.
Wow. You really should get some more motivation to, make something.
Writing keeps me focused. So I think with the pandemic, it's been really important to me to always have a task. I have my writing agenda right next to me here in the office on the wall. And when I finish one thing, I'm like, okay, start something else. Like, don't give yourself too much time to sit and ruminate.
Well, that's really incredible. I'm so happy that you had this chance to be with us. I think, what we've touched on so many things that, the power of fantasy, the the importance of making history real for kids. Don't allow your kids to think that history is boring. History is exciting and it's vibrant and it can teach us so much. And fantasy too. I was just watching a documentary on William Shatner going up on Blue Origin, and Star Trek was something that a lot of people who weren't directly involved in the civil rights movement got people thinking about, isn't there a way we could be better? Wouldn't it be better if we're all working on the starship together and we had people from all over in all walks of life? And I think that for a lot of people, that fantasy science fiction series opened up a lot of eyes.
Absolutely. Once you see something and you see it as a viable possibility, you can work towards it. Yeah, it doesn't seem so far-fetched.
Yeah. Before we go, what's the one, if I gave you my magic wand, which is just a big pin right here, and you could wave it, what kind of a world would we be looking at?
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Well, we would be looking at a world where we cared for one another deeply, not just on a personal level, but on a policy level. I am Canadian, which means I grew up with the benefit of socialized medicine. Everybody just commits in the country to having a medical system that serves everyone for free. I would love to see that implemented around the world. Right now, we're dealing with the Omicron variant because we didn't have equal distribution of vaccines. And so when you leave a whole big portion of the world unvaccinated, these variants are going to continue to emerge, and that jeopardizes all of us. So if I had a magic wand and I could wave it, I would want to create a world where we had healthcare and enough food and enough housing. Chicago has a housing crisis. Our country has a housing crisis. Nobody should be unhoused. I would just want to see a world that was just, a world rooted in justice.
Well, let's see if we can make that magic wand happen. I think the magic, again, that magic is with us. It's inside us. We just have to come together to make it happen. People coming
together. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Hey, if people wanted to come together to find out more about Zetta Elliott and the Dragons in a Bag series, where should they go?
They should definitely check out my website, zettaelliott.com, and there are lots of T's and L's in my name, so try to make sure you don't leave any out. You can also follow me on social media, Instagram and Twitter. It's the same handle, @Zetta Elliott.
Yeah. We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Witches Apprentice, the latest book, and the Dragons in a Bag series. Our guest has been Zetta Elliott. Hey, Zetta, this has been so much fun. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yes, it has. Enjoy Hyde Park for the holidays, your Hyde Park. And take care. Happy New Year and happy holidays to everyone.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Daniela Rushton. She'll be here to celebrate the Panther Tales. Hey, if you're the author of a fantastic children's book, please, please, please know that we would love to help you celebrate that book and let the world know all about it. You can go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to find out how you can be a guest on the podcast. You can find out about our Certified Great Read program, and you can also find out about our monthly promotion program that will celebrate your book with commercials on the podcast, with messages to our 63,000 and still growing social media followers, and also display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. Learn all about it by going to readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll on down. Hey, we want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Zetta Elliott. Please be sure to check out The Witches Apprentice. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady. Want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.